before the sun ever rose high enough to warm the bones of the land. There were mornings that felt like warnings, mornings that arrived pale and quiet, the kind that slipped over a place as if even the light was unsure it belonged. This was one of them. The settlement woke without ceremony. Smoke lifted thin from a handful of chimneys, carrying the bitter scent of burned coffee and yesterday's bread. Buildings leaned along the main road like tired men who had stopped pretending to stand straight. Their boards were warped by years of weather. Their paint long faded into colors no one could name. The town was awake, but it was not alert. It rarely ever was. At the far end of the street, where packed dirt gave way to scrub and open ground, a cottonwood stood alone. Its trunk was thick, scarred with old nail holes and careless cuts. A tree that had been used more than it had been cared for. 2 women were tied to it. Their wrists were bound separately around the trunk. Rope pulled tight enough to hold, not yet tight enough to bleed. The fibers were rough, reused, stiff with dust and old sweat, their backs pressed into the bark. Their boots were planted firmly in the dirt. They stood close, but did not lean into one another. Each kept her own balance. Each conserved what strength she could. They were young, but the kind of young that hardship touches early. Their faces carried exhaustion more than fear. The exhaustion that comes from long nights without rest and longer years without protection. Their clothes were simple and worn, meant for travel and work rather than decoration, hems dark with dirt. One wore her dark hair braided tight against her head, every strand controlled. The other left hers looser, tied back just enough to keep it from her eyes. Their features were nearly identical, but the way they held themselves told the difference. People passed. A baker stepped out, wiped his hands on his apron, glanced once and went back inside. A woman with a basket slowed, hesitated, then shifted her grip and walked on. 2 men lingered only long enough to confirm the punishment was still happening, then moved away. No one spoke. No one asked what the women had done. The silence was not accidental. It was deliberate. This was meant to be seen, not questioned. The braided woman kept her head lifted. Her gaze moved slowly along the street, steady, controlled. She did not look for rescue. She did not look away either. The other kept her eyes lowered, not from shame, but calculation, saving energy, sparing herself the strain of watching faces she already knew would not change. Fear existed, but it was contained, held low and tight where panic could not reach easily. They had learned long ago what panic cost. They focused instead on staying upright, on keeping blood moving in their hands, on waiting for the sun to climb high enough to take the edge off the cold. Elias Cole entered town just after the sun cleared the roofs. He had planned his arrival as he planned most things, measured and quiet, timed to avoid crowds and unnecessary talk. He tied his horse at the far end of the road, away from the noise, checked the knot twice before stepping back. His movements were calm, practiced. His posture easy, his eyes forward. Towns unsettled him, not because of danger, but because of memory. Too many places like this had taught him what happened when no one stepped forward. He turned toward the supply store, his list already formed in his mind. Flour, nails, salt, nothing more. He did not intend to stay. He noticed the women because the space around them felt wrong. There was motion everywhere else. Boots on dirt, voices rising and falling, doors opening and closing. But near the cottonwood, everything slowed. Elias felt it before he saw it. A tightening beneath his ribs that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with recognition. He stopped. He did not approach at once. He stood where he was, letting his eyes take in the details without drawing attention. The rope, the absence of guards, the way people gave the tree a wide berth, as if punishment itself could spread. He understood enough without being told. His first instinct was caution. This was not his town. Stepping in meant being seen. Being seen led to questions. Questions had a way of tugging at parts of his life he had worked hard to bury. He felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the urge to finish his business and leave. Then the braided woman lifted her eyes and met his. There was no plea in them, no challenge either, just awareness. She had seen him seeing. It struck heavier than any cry could have. He glanced to the other sister, caught the tension in her shoulders, the slight curl of her fingers against the rope. testing it without wasting strength. What rose in him then was not pity, it was recognition. He thought of other mornings, other places, of standing where others stood and watching because it was easier. He remembered arriving too late once, understanding what should have been done only after it no longer mattered. The choice did not feel brave. It felt inevitable. Elias walked forward. His pace did not change. His face did not. A few heads turned. Curiosity flickered, then settled back into indifference. He stopped before the tree, drew his knife, and cut the first rope clean through. The fibers parted with a dull snap. He moved to the second wrist and did the same, careful not to catch skin. Neither woman spoke. Neither thanked him. They worked their hands slowly, blood returning, eyes alert, bodies ready in case this was not finished. Elias turned away, went to the bakery, laid coins on the counter without bargaining, and took a loaf. He set it near the barrel by the tree. "You can walk," he said quietly. He did not wait. He headed back toward his horse, already preparing for whatever attention this might bring, already telling himself he would handle it as he handled everything else, directly, without noise. He told himself not to look back. He told himself they would go their own way. He told himself this was the end of it. Footsteps followed, not hurried, not fading. He tightened the cinch by habit, mounted, adjusted his reins, buying himself time. When he finally turned, the women stood several paces behind him, not close, not distant enough for coincidence. They waited, hands free now but held carefully. The braided woman met his eyes again, reading his posture the way some people read weather. The other stood slightly to the side, attention shifting between him, the buildings, the open land beyond. Elias felt the weight of choice settle in his chest. He had said they could walk. He had not said where. He nodded once, not invitation, but acknowledgement, and turned his horse east toward open ground. If they followed, it would be because they chose to. That mattered to him. They walked behind him as he rode out, keeping a distance that felt deliberate. He slowed without making a show of it, giving them time. Aware of what the ropes had done to their shoulders and wrists, he did not speak. He listened instead, to the rhythm of their steps, to the way they stopped when he stopped, to the silence that did not press for explanation. The town fell away quickly. Sound softened. Wood and stone gave way to wind and grass. Elias felt his breathing ease as the buildings disappeared. He had not realized how tight he had been until it loosened. At a shallow rise where the road dissolved into ruts, Elias dismounted, led his horse to shade, and set down his pack. He took out his canteen and held it out. The braided woman drank first, sparingly, then passed it to her sister. Neither spoke. Elias watched them as he watched land, not for weakness, but for signs of trouble. He saw how the braided one rolled her shoulders carefully, working feeling back into her arms, how the other stayed seated, conserving energy, eyes never still. These were not people used to being carried. That eased something in him. They continued. The walk stretched long and quiet. Elias rode ahead, giving space, his thoughts busy with practical matters he used to keep emotion at bay. Food could stretch. The house could be rearranged. The second bunk had not been used in years. He told himself he was planning, not committing. Still, unease stayed with him. Not fear of them, but of what staying might demand. He had built his life so no one depended on him. Dependence had once led to hesitation. Hesitation had led to loss. The memory pressed sharp against his ribs. Unwelcome, but he did not let it slow him. When the ranch came into view, low and weathered against the open land, something shifted in him that he could not yet name. He dismounted by the fence and waited. When they reached him, he gestured toward the well, the house, the open space. "You can rest here," he said. Nothing more. He did not say how long. He did not say why. They stepped through the gate without relief, but with the careful caution of people shaped by experience. As Elias led his horse toward the corral, he told himself again that this was temporary. The land offered no answer. Night settled without ceremony. The lamp's glow caught on worn edges, on the long, unused second bed, on shelves that held only what was needed. Elias was aware of every sound, soft boots, controlled movement, but none of it carried threat. He showed them where to sleep, then returned to the main room. He cooked as he always did, methodical, stretching what little he had. When they joined him, they sat where space was offered. They ate in silence. The scrape of utensils, the steady breathing of people who had learned to remain alert even at rest. Elias felt the tension in his shoulders ease by degrees. Afterward, the braided woman gathered plates without asking. He started to stop her, then didn't. The other wiped the table. Movements precise. The room adjusted itself around them without conversation. Sleep came unevenly. Elias lay listening, not for danger but for change, for the subtle shift of something settling where it had not been before. He heard the soft rustle of blankets, controlled breaths. His mind wandered to other nights, other promises to stay alert that he had failed to keep. The memory tightened his chest, but he stayed awake long enough this time to know nothing required him. Morning came clear and cold. Elias was already up when they stepped into the room. Coffee simmered. He set out tasks plainly. A fence rail, water barrels, a loose hinge. He spoke without expectation. Neither refused. They worked with care rather than speed, learning the land as it was. Mara took the heavier labor. Elias stayed near the house at first, then moved outward. Elias found himself adjusting without thinking, placing tools where they could reach, slowing his pace to keep work shared. He noticed only when he realized he was no longer working around people, but with them, and the thought unsettled him more than he expected. The days did not announce themselves as change. They arrived the way weather did, quietly, shaping what stood beneath them without asking permission. By the fourth morning, the ranch no longer felt like a place holding its breath. Elias noticed it while pulling on his boots, the quiet different now, not hollow or sharp but layered. The stove had already been lit. Coffee warmed low, watched carefully. He paused in the doorway longer than usual, listening, adjusting to the simple fact that the day had begun without him setting it in motion. Outside, the air bit at exposed skin. Elias moved through his routine as he always had, checking animals, testing fence posts, walking the boundary lines that had defined his life for years. He worked alone at first, not because he expected to be, but because habit still reached him before trust. Mara joined him without sound. She took the extra hammer he had set aside, not as a question, not as a claim, simply as what made sense. She watched his movements, adjusted, and braced the opposite post before he could speak. Elias felt the brief urge to correct her, then stopped when he saw she had already chosen the right angle. They worked in parallel silence, wood thudding into place, the fence settling straight. He was aware of her the way he was aware of land before a storm, not distracted but attentive. When he paused, she paused. When he shifted, she adjusted. The restraint mattered. It told him she was not trying to earn space. She was respecting it. Laia remained closer to the house, but her presence traveled outward. Tools returned to places Elias did not remember assigning. Water appeared where it was needed. Meals stretched further without comment. The house slowly changed shape, not through decoration, but through care. Dust that had long been accepted as permanent disappeared. Hinges stopped complaining. Shelves began to make sense. Elias caught himself once, standing in the doorway, watching her work, struck by the way she moved through the space as if she understood where quiet belonged. At midday, Elias brought water without speaking. They drank in turns. He noticed the faint marks still visible on their wrists and felt something tighten in his chest that he did not name. Sympathy could become distraction. He had learned that lesson too well. The afternoon brought more work than planned. Uban hinge split along the grain, the door sagging under its own weight. Elias knelt to study it, already measuring the time it would cost. Mara crouched beside him, eyes tracing the break. "It can hold," she said quietly, "if you reset it." The words surprised him, not because they were spoken, but because they matched his own thought. He handed her the tool without comment. The repair took longer than he liked, but when they finished, the door swung clean. No drag, no sound. Elias felt satisfaction settle deeper than the task deserved. He told himself it was about good work. He did not ask why it felt like more. As evening came, the ranch moved without direction. Laia prepared food. Mara stacked wood. Elias washed up. No one claimed roles. No one assigned them. The balance formed because it was practical. That night, Elias realized he had not once wondered whether they would leave. The thought had passed its point of relevance without asking him. The realization settled in his chest, not heavy, but undeniable. Sleep came easier than it had in years. The memories that usually pressed against him stayed back, not erased but held at a distance by the quiet presence of people who were no longer passing through. The following weeks shaped themselves the same. Way, work, weather, quiet. Elias marked time as he always had by sun and soil, but his attention no longer stayed fixed only on what needed fixing. There were now other movements to account for, other rhythms that did not interrupt his own, but ran beside it. Mara worked with him more often than not. It was never discussed. She simply appeared where strength and steadiness mattered. She lifted without showing strain, braced without instruction, and waited when he paused. Elias realized one afternoon that he trusted her positioning without checking twice. The awareness unsettled him when he noticed it. They spoke rarely, and when they did, it was precise. A word about uneven ground, a warning when wind cut the yard. Once when dust rose hard and fast, Elias saw her pull her scarf higher without breaking stride. Eyes forward, posture unchanged. Something familiar and tight stirred beneath his ribs. Not concern, recognition. Elias' presence shaped the spaces Elias had once treated as little more than shelter. She learned the house the way some learned terrain, testing, adjusting, repairing what had been left not from neglect, but necessity. Elias noticed meals growing more balanced, not richer, just steadier. He caught himself setting out an extra plate one evening before realizing what he was doing. His hand stilled. Then he finished the task without correcting himself. The ranch changed little to an outsider. The same fences, the same low house, the same stretch of open land. But Elias felt it in the way sound carried, in the way footsteps no longer echoed as sharply, in the way the nights no longer felt like something to endure. The first storm of the season came in low and fast. Wind bent the grass. Rain cut hard against the roof. Elias secured what needed securing. Mara moved beside him, silent and certain. Elias stayed near the stove, keeping heat steady, watching windows, preparing dry cloth. When the worst of it passed, they stood under the porch, listening to the last drops fall from the eaves. Mara rested her forearms on the rail. Lia leaned against the post. Elias stood between them, hands loose at his sides. For a moment none of them spoke. The land stretched wide and dark beyond the fence, the kind of darkness Elias had always known how to live inside. But it did not feel the same now. It no longer pressed. "You don't have to stay," Elias said at last, his voice low, even. He did not look at them when he spoke. Mara answered first. "We are." Lia nodded once. "If you'll have us." Elias drew a slow breath. The words he had built his life around rose easily, temporary, passing through. He let them go. He looked at them then, really looked. Two women who had not asked to be saved, who had walked because they chose to, who had worked because they understood what it meant to build something that held. "You can," he said. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere an animal shifted in the barn. The ranch stood quiet and occupied. Elias turned back toward the house. They followed, not behind him, not ahead, but with him. And for the first time in a long while, Elias Cole did not feel like a man standing at the edge of things. He felt like someone who had finally come home.